Finding nothing suspicious, I shifted my scope to the tree line on the left and caught a glimmer of light in the dark foliage. I took a closer look. It was the barrel of a rifle, glinting in the sun and sticking out like a finger into the open field. I knew at once that it was Hammer's rifle, skirting, like mine, the field. With a sense of relief, I lowered the rifle and stopped my gaze on the shiny barrel. It was pinpointing Hammer's location to me. Now all that was left to do was wait. Although I tried to focus my attention on the field, every now and then I glanced back at the rifle barrel pointed motionless forward. A few minutes passed, and I began to wonder what Hammer was aiming at, and then I saw what it was. 30 meters from his position, two heads were bouncing above the tall grass. They were moving south parallel to the edge of the forest. Hammer must have noticed them approaching from the left and was patiently watching them. I raised my rifle and caught them in the scope. They were indeed Viet Cong with assault rifles on their belts, swaying with each step. They were passing Hammer's position and were about 200 meters from me, approaching with slow steps, looking ahead of me and unaware of the danger looming from the edge of the forest. I put my finger on the trigger and waited for Hammer to open fire. They were close to him, 40 meters away, but moving away and coming toward me along a line 30 meters from my position. I didn't understand why Hammer wasn't firing. Those would have been the sure shots he was hoping for. As the Viet Cong approached, I felt the muscles in my chest tighten. My hands were shaking. Sweat was pouring into my eyes, and I blinked to see better and tried to hold my rifle firmly. The Viet Cong were on my left at a 50-degree angle, approaching the apex of the triangle between Hammer's position and mine when I realized that Hammer was waiting for the best crossfire position. The moment I estimated that the Viet Cong had reached the apex of the triangle, I took breathless aim at the first of the two bouncing heads and turned all ears. A few seconds passed and two shots rang out in quick succession. At the moment of the second shot, the head in my scope jerked to the left and disappeared. I fired a few shots and, releasing the trigger, looked over the scope. Where the two Viet Cong had been, the grass glistened in the bright sunlight. Nothing was moving. I didn't know if Hammer had killed the Viet Cong or only wounded them or missed them altogether. In the limited field of view of my scope, I only noticed that the head I was aiming at had disappeared before I fired the first shot. I remained in my position and waited, wandering my gaze from the field to the spot on the edge of the woods where I had seen Hammer's rifle. It had disappeared, and there was no sign of him in the shadows of the trees. Where had he gone? We hadn't agreed on where we'd meet again. I thought about heading back through the woods to his position, but I decided against it. Let him find me. He must know where I am from my shots. Hammer appeared suddenly from the shadows of the trees. Standing at the edge of the field and raising his rifle, he made signs to me. This surprised me. I didn't expect him to venture out into the open. He must be convinced he's killed the Viet Cong. Does he have that much faith in his sniper skills? 2 shots, 2 heads? I wasn't so sure. However, when I saw Hammer waving his rifle in my direction, I thought I was being overly cautious. Besides, Hammer was not the kind of man who would take such a foolish risk. After all, he did not dare enter the huts alone. I stepped out of my hiding place into the sunlight and waved to him. He beckoned to me to approach. I took 2 or 3 steps, picking my way cautiously through the thick grass, when a shot rang out. I didn't see when he fired. The bullet whistled to the left of my head, and the next moment I was lying face down on the grass. I felt a warm trickle coming from my ear, and I didn't realize it was blood. The bullet must have hit me, though I felt no pain. I lay still and did not utter a sound. The blood was gradually filling my ear, but I didn't wipe it away. I held my breath and listened. Not a sound. I lifted my head, but saw nothing but faintly rippling to hit the left side of my head. I must have fired from the edge of the forest. I must have been looking down at the moment Hammer fired. He was at most 100 yards away, and the thought of him sneaking up on me made every muscle in my body tense. I was afraid to move. The rifle clutched in my hand lay beneath me. I had to get it out before he got any closer. Thank God it was set on automatic. I slowly rolled over onto my right side, carefully pulled the rifle up to my chest and froze. My only option was to play dead and wait for him to approach. He had to make sure he hit me. It seemed like an eternity until I heard the ominous sound of footsteps breaking the dry grass. Then I heard Hammer's voice calling my name. The sly fool. I estimated that he was about 20 feet from me when the footsteps died away. There was an unbearable silence as we both listened to the sounds coming from the other. I was afraid to breathe. Finally, the grass crunched again and the footsteps came closer. I saw him about 10 meters away. He stood motionless. His torso was visible in the gap between the grass and the edge of my helmet. The barrel of the rifle was pointed downward. After a second's hesitation, he moved forward, grenades dangling from his belt across his belly. Hammer never had to raise his rifle. I hastily fired a line into his belly. The grenades exploded from the bullets, knocking him back several feet into the grass. Jumping to my feet, I stood over him. He was lying on his back. The grenades had ripped open his stomach and chest, his insides splattering his face. I turned away. My legs trembled. I knelt down and vomited. Utter joy swept over me. The guide had managed to outsmart Hammer and was alive. Thankfully, I threw up once more, easing the tension in my stomach. I took a deep breath of fresh air into my lungs with pleasure. On the way back, I pondered how I would report what had happened. I came up with the details easily, and the bullet that had grazed me served as perfect evidence. The blood in my ear had caked and dried in rivulets on the left side of the limb. It didn't bother me, and I purposely didn't wipe it off. Halfway behind me, 2 short bursts of gunfire sounded. It was the patrol chief warning that there were more Viet Cong in the valley, but it didn't matter now. It was too late to alarm me or hammer. When I emerged from the woods, the patrol leader and another soldier, Lawton, were on the hill watching the valley. They turned sharply at the sound of my footsteps, then lowered their rifles. "What happened?" the patrol leader asked, seeing my bloody face. "Are you wounded?" "It's nothing." A bullet grazed the tip of my ear. "What happened?" he repeated. I briefly told him the whole story, sticking to the true facts up to the point where we got the Viet Cong in the crossfire. "I heard you firing," the sergeant said, "but then it got quiet, and then there was another line. Did you?" "Yes, but they killed Hammer. We thought we'd killed them in the crossfire. When it got quiet, Hammer went out into the field to check it out. I left my position, and we were getting close when one of the gooks shot him and then got me before I shot him. He was pretty damn fast with the machine gun. I used up half a magazine on him." "You got lucky." "Yeah." "You sure Hammer's dead?" "You bet." Huck detonated the grenades on his belt. Tore the whole thing apart. "Oh my God, poor guy," sighed the sergeant. "Anyway, we got 2 for 1, Lawton put in. "The hell we did." The sergeant was angry. Hammer was a good soldier. He was worth 10 gook. No less, I added. The sergeant looked out over the valley and turned away. "Oh, I think we should go home. I spotted 5 more Viet Cong heading south. The helicopter could still pick them up. Did you hear my warning shots? I was worried about you." "I did. I was halfway here at the time." "You sure got lucky." "Poor Hammer blowing himself up with his own grenades. Terrible death." "Yes, it was." I confirmed. "How's your ear?" the sergeant asked. "It doesn't bother me. I think it looks worse than it really is." "No, it doesn't look that bad. Charlie only took a small piece of it. The paramedics will fix it up. Just make sure it doesn't get infected. I knew a guy who got scratched by a landmine. Seemed like a small thing, but it mangled half his. Had to send him home." "That's from a Charlie bullet," I said. "I don't mind being sent home." That'd be nice," the sergeant grinned. "You'll get a Purple Heart," Lawton said. "That's just what I want. Get a move on." The sergeant shouted at Lawton. "We can't stay here all day." At the base, the medic washed my ear, cauterized the wound, and marked it fit for duty on my medical book. "No. Do you want to get a Purple Heart for that?" the medic asked, still taking notes, "or do you want to wait until you get something worse?" "Sign me up," I replied. "I need it as a souvenir. I'll make up some racy story to go with it." "Yeah, you do that." "All right, Glass, that's it. If it gets infected, you bring that ear over here and we'll pull it off." Oh boy. I was getting ready for mess hall at noon when the sergeant came into my tent. "The lieutenant wants to see you this afternoon." "Why?" "I don't know." "You told him everything, didn't you?" "Oh, of course I did. He got pretty excited when he heard what we found. Sent 2 helicopters to get the rest of the gooks." "Did he say anything about Hammer?" "Yeah. He was very sorry. Said Hammer was one of his best soldiers. One of the choppers should pick him up. I told him Hammer was somewhere near the end of the trail. Is that? That's right. Only there's almost nothing to send home. You don't know what the medics could do with just his face. I saw them sew a guy up. He was cut open by a mine from groin to Adam's apple, like cutting up a fish. So they stuck the insides back in and sewed him up, and when they put him in a clean uniform, he looked as good as new. His family could have kept his coffin open for the funeral. There's nothing to be done about the face. Hammer's face is fine, I said. That's not bad. Last year, my buddy got hit in the face by a landmine, tore the whole left side of his head off. They sealed him up and sent him home with a dog tag and warned his family not to open the coffin. And his old man didn't want to believe he was inside until he saw for himself. Said the army could make a mistake, that he didn't want to bury a stranger with his boy's dog tag. He made me open the box. He must have recognized those half faces because he immediately collapsed on the dead man. Heart attack, knocked the coffin to the floor at the funeral, in front of everyone. Scandal. What a stubborn bastard. How did you know about it? His sister told me the whole story, and well done. You don't think about things like that, but what if it happens to you? Do you understand? I wrote to my old man about it, told him not to open it if they sent me home in a sealed box. Bury it, that's all. I never thought about it. Well, think about it. I can't say my old man's going to have a stroke. He's a tough old man. But my mother's a different matter. I don't want her to see me like this. It'd be easier on her. Yeah, I don't want her to suffer too much. That's what I think. Fairy tales like your ear. He looked at me. It's almost invisible if you don't look closely. Nice job on him. It's all right. I don't even know if it's there until I touch it. Hey, it looked lousy when I saw the blood first. You got lucky. Couple more inches and we'd have sent you home too. In a sealed box. The sergeant laughed. You're so calm, Glass. Good for you. How about a chew, buddy? 'Cause we're late for breakfast. Let's go. Oh, I hate these night patrols. No food, no weed. And if anything happens like this morning, no breakfast. Sorry to lose the eggs and bacon. It's the only decent food I've had all day. That's my point. We left the tent and headed for the mess hall. I wasn't thinking about the upcoming conversation with the lieutenant. It didn't bother me. I had no complaints this time. I was above it now. I was no longer going against the system, and strangely enough, I was content. Perhaps my self-awareness had been influenced in some way by the sergeant's grim tales. His obsessive interest in the gruesome details of death had affected my attitude toward it. I realized that I cared little about my own death because there was no one to care for me, no one to mourn me. If I am sent home in a sealed coffin, no one at the orphanage will think to remove the lid to see if it is really me. And even now, as I write these lines, I don't care about the issue of death. The court can take my life for what I have done. So be it. But he'll never know what's in my head. That's for you to judge. The lieutenant sat motionless in his chair, nervously fiddling with his pencil. I felt free this time. He got right to the point. The sergeant told me what happened, Glass. But I need details for my report. We have an obligation to tell the family everything we know about Hammer's death. I understand, sir. Tell me exactly what happened after you identified the Viet Cong. Yes, sir. I calmly, in greater detail than I had given the sergeant, told him what we had done. During my story, the lieutenant was drawing some plan and making notes in his notebook, and when I finished, he began his interrogation. I don't understand one thing, Glass. If you and Hammer were within 100 yards of each other when you took the gooks in the crossfire, why did you link up before you followed them into the field? Why didn't you march while holding them in the crossfire? I shrugged my shoulders. Hey, when Hammer showed up and signalled me to come up to him, I figured he knew for sure he'd nailed the gooks. At least that's what he said when I approached him. Did you think they were killed too? I wasn't sure. Like I said, when Hammer opened fire, the gook I had my sights on went down as soon as I fired. I didn't know if Hammer hit him or me, or if he just threw himself to the ground. I mean, you know how fast that happens. But Hammer was sure. That's what he said. He was an excellent shot. Yes, he was. If he was sure the gooks were dead, why'd you go into the field? Hammer wanted their machine guns. How far apart were you when you went into the field? Met you term, 4 meters. Were you walking parallel? No. Hammer went first. I was a little behind and to the right. Right. He drew 2 circles on a pad of paper and slid it across the table to me. That's about right, I said. And then what happened? I told you, sir. No, tell me again. No. Huck opened fire and hit us. Us. He put a bullet through Hammer's stomach and hit my ear before I killed him. I touched the tip of my ear. Yeah, I just got the medical report. It's just a superficial wound. You're really lucky, Glass. Hammer gets blown up by his own grenades and you get off with nothing. Hard to believe. He stared at my face and his eyes narrowed. Hey, I'm being honest with you, Glass. I can't imagine Hammer taking such a risk. He had to be absolutely sure the Gooks were killed. He convinced me. I didn't want to go into the field. Yeah. Did you get their machine guns? No, sir. I got the hell out of there. How do you know you killed that Gook? He never fired again. After I fired a line at him, it got awful quiet. I know I killed him. Then I sent a helicopter to pick up Hammer. The medics have to examine him thoroughly before they send the body out. It was clear what he was implying, and I felt strongly tempted to tell him how lucky I was that the medics would only find grenade fragments and not the rifle bullets that had detonated them. Hey, he's in terrible shape, I said. The grenades ripped him open. It was scary to look at him. But the medics must be used to it. They saw everything. I hear they're pretty good at patching things up if the face is all right. You really are the unflappable type, Glass. Sir? Yes, I know you had a grudge against Hammer. Why don't you admit it? You're glad he's dead. No, sir. I'm just glad it didn't happen to me. It's only natural. I pushed the notebook away with irritation. Although the lieutenant had no evidence against me, the conversation alarmed me. I was sure he had assigned me to this night patrol with the expectation of a completely different outcome. I was infuriated by his trap-setting tactics, and my hostility came out. Why did you assign me and Hammer to the same patrol when you promised not to? My question startled him, but he quickly got over himself. The list was made by the assistant platoon commander. It was just an ordinary night patrol to guard the base. But you saw the list, sir, didn't you? Yes. He didn't take his eyes off me. I didn't think about it. I had more important things to do. Hammer came out of that case unscathed. He had no grudge against you, did he? He was watching me with a scrutinizing eye, and I began to regret raising the question, but still I persisted. Did Hammer know you had me on that other case? What do you want, Glass? What's troubling you? You can be frank with me. He smiled falsely. Nothing. Absolutely nothing, sir. It's just that I was surprised to see Hammer last night after what you promised me. Did he say anything to you about that other episode? No, sir. He was, on the whole, quite friendly. But you were suspicious of him, weren't you? No, sir. I was just surprised, as I say. Tell me, Glass, whose idea was it to go after the Gooks? Hammer's. He was so eager, he talked the patrol chief into it. Why didn't Lawton go with him? I calmly met the lieutenant's probing gaze. Hammer wanted to come with me. The sergeant didn't object. You must have been afraid to be alone with Hammer if you thought he knew you dribbled on him? Yes, I thought about it, and I was doubly careful. And you decided to kill him before he killed you. Now the I's were dotted, and I fought back. Hammer was killed by Charlie, Lieutenant, and he got me. I couldn't shoot my own ear out with a rifle. That's too maudlin. The lieutenant's face flashed. You got a lot of nerve, Glass. You'll never get along here, and I'll make it up to you. Now get the hell out of here. His rage surprised me. I didn't expect him to explode, but I was pleased. Now I knew where I stood, though I could do little to help myself. I stood up, saluted carelessly, looking at the top of his head, and left him staring sullenly at the sketches in his notebook. He had a lot to think about, and so did I. Of course I wouldn't get along, but I was celebrating my little victory. It didn't last long, however. The failure of the lieutenant's plan worried me. He could send me out with another Hammer. Eventually he would find a way to get rid of me. What could I do? In the evening, smoking pot to relieve the tension. I mused to myself that it would be a good idea to roll a cocked grenade into the lieutenant's tent while he slept. And why not? It wouldn't be that unusual. I fell asleep with that thought and slept soundly. The next morning an order appeared on the bulletin board, 2 paragraphs of which were of particular interest to me. Private Richard Hammer, killed in action, who volunteered to destroy an enemy ambush and did so at the cost of his life, to be presented posthumously to the Order of the Bronze Star. Private David Glass, to report to the platoon sergeant on duty for an order of transfer to Camp Jordan, 3rd Cavalry Division at Longhua. Lieutenant Cauldron's decision to transfer me was unexpected. I breathed a sigh of relief and thought it was a happy decision for both of us. Perhaps he had read my foolish thoughts. Handing me my transfer order, the duty sergeant said, "You're leaving this afternoon, Glass. When you get to Camp Jordan, you'll be assigned as a helicopter gunner. It's a nice, clean job. You won't have to wade through any more brush. You're a lucky man, Glass." "Yeah, I am." "Say, weren't you on that patrol with Hammer yesterday?" "A test of tay." "How come he got the star and you didn't?" I shrugged. "He was killed in action, and I was only slightly wounded." "Yes," the sergeant snorted angrily. "I see what you mean. Only the dead are heroes in... In all my time in Camp Jordan, I never got used to the excruciating heat. Situated on mounded land at the headwaters of the Mekong Delta in Longhua Province, this camp seemed to suck up the humid heat from the surrounding rice fields like a sponge. If you don't count the time I spent flying, running errands, I lived continuously drenched in sweat. Even at night, it didn't get any cooler than on the plateau in Kambina. There, after the day's work, I could always count on a good night's sleep in order to gain strength for tomorrow's patrol. Now I slept restlessly, bathed in my own sweat, and often woke up more tired than when I went to bed. In almost everything else, however, Camp Jordan was better than Kambine. I was spared the harassment of Lieutenant Cauldron, and serving as a helicopter gunner was cleaner and far less harrowing than walking through swamps and jungle on foot patrols, and more suited to my personality. Flying was pleasantly exhilarating, and since the enemy was distant and invisible, aerial fire seemed impersonal. During my first sorties I fired my machine gun at trees, jungles, ravines, not at men, women and children. Of course, it was assumed that where our rockets were tearing and bullets were falling, enemy soldiers were hiding, but it felt very different when you couldn't see them. For 2 weeks, until we flew out on the mission, I saw no mutilated corpses or agonizing wounded on either side. As long as it lasted, I was relieved. That day we were given a special assignment. All morning there was heavy fighting near the village of Loiku against a large detachment of the enemy. By mid-afternoon, when the fighting stopped, our troops had killed a dozen enemy soldiers and taken several prisoners. The colonel commanding our troops radioed for an armed helicopter to take the prisoners out for interrogation. Sergeant Bright, the pilot of our helicopter, instructed us on the way to the landing zone. When we landed on a grass-covered hill in the middle of a rice paddy, about 200 meters from where we had spotted our troops, Sergeant Bright ordered me to report to the colonel that we were ready to lift off as soon as we were loaded. Take a rifle just in case," he said. "There's no telling what else is going on up there." I trudged across the wet field and saw the colonel, a lieutenant, and some soldiers guarding the prisoners. There were 6 of them, 2 men, 2 women, and 2 small children. The children, a boy and a girl, were huddled against their mothers, and the whole group looked very frightened. I reported to the colonel that we were ready to load the prisoners. He saw fit to correct me by saying that they were considered detainees until after interrogation by the scouts their guilt was established. I was astonished at this strict interpretation of the rules by the colonel, especially as he had just come out of a bloody battle. Looking at the group huddled on the ground, I thought, I wonder how the scouts will determine whether the 4-year-old children are detainees or prisoners of war. Will they interrogate them, or simply judge them by their relationship to their mothers? The colonel ordered a lieutenant and 2 corporals to help me get the detainees to the landing site and send them off as soon as possible. He was concerned about the Viet Cong troops who had retreated into the forest 1,000 meters south, on the other side of the rice paddy. He thought they had entrenched there along with the reinforcements they had received. With no accurate information about their numbers and location, he was waiting for reinforcements to begin pursuit. The colonel warned me to keep the helicopter away from the edge of the forest after takeoff. I heeded his warning. If a single rifle bullet, even at a distance of a few hundred meters, hit an important part of the propeller or penetrated the gearbox, the helicopter could fall to the ground with a thud. When the colonel ordered us to move, two corporals began poking the frightened detainees with their rifle butts to get them to their feet. The women, clutching their children to them, stood up quickly, but the men hesitated, and the rifle butts hit them harder on their... Then they jumped up and pressed closely against the women, covering them with their bodies. One of the soldiers began to drive them forward, poking them in the backs with his rifle. Another swore and began to beat the woman closest to him with his fist. Crouched under the blows, the woman with the boy in her arms stumbled, lost her balance and fell to the ground, crushing the child under her. The boy cried out fearfully and she quickly got up, clutching the child tighter to her. As the group moved, the colonel shouted to the soldiers, Calm down, don't you dare hit them." The soldiers quieted down, and we moved toward the helicopter through the marshy rice field. We walked along the embankment separating the sections of the field planted with young rice shoots. After walking about 30 meters, one of the soldiers turned around for a moment and began poking the prisoners again with the barrel of his rifle. Another soldier did the same. With each blow, the prisoners stumbled and slid in the mud, trying to avoid the blows to their arms and legs. Swearing and laughing, the soldiers continued to beat the prisoners. I looked questioningly at the lieutenant, but he was amused by their game and smirked at me. Finally, when one of the women fell into the mud with her baby and the soldiers began kicking her with their feet until she could hardly get up, I turned to the lieutenant. "There is no point in beating them. It only delays us." "Where are you in such a hurry?" the lieutenant asked. "We've had enough of these jinks this morning, and the boys are just letting their feelings out. It's good for them. It's good for me, too. If it weren't for the colonel's stupid virtue, I'd shoot them where they were caught." "Even if they are simple peasants working in the rice paddies?" I asked. "What the hell do you know? The first shots this morning came from this very village in the north. We were peacefully walking along when fire rained down on us at the edge of the paddy field. They were 100 men against us 20. It was 4 hours before they lost enough gooks, ceased firing, and fled into the forest. We found this group hiding right among the dead. The squealing of children gave them away. They're Viet Cong, flyboy. In my opinion, the whole bastard country is Viet Cong. And the kids, too." I wanted to ask, but I was learned enough to keep quiet. The lieutenant and the two soldiers looked at me with undisguised hostility. We continued on our way in silence. Then one of the soldiers angrily jabbed his rifle into the groin of one of the men who had fallen behind the others. The man howled and fell to his knees with his hands on his groin. The other captives stopped and turned on him. The man, kneeling and bowing his head, groaned and swayed in pain. "Get him up," ordered the lieutenant. The soldier's heavy boot struck the man in the jaw with all its force. He fell on his side into the ditch and lay there in the mud, looking fearfully at the soldier standing over him. "No, get up, you jink." The man shook his head, covering it with his hands. A boot struck him in the ribs. "Get up." Waiting for the next blow, the man shrank into a ball to make himself as small as possible. The two women screamed shrilly, covering the heads of crying children. Another man went to the man lying on the ground, but a second soldier stood in front of him and hit him in the chest with a buttstock, throwing him back to the women. I hung my rifle on my shoulder and headed toward the fallen man. "What the hell do you want?" shouted the lieutenant. "I'll get him up. Beating him won't do any good. Mind your own business, flyboy. He'll get up on his own." The lieutenant pointed to the group of prisons. "Wade, take them to the helicopter. Me and this one will follow you." Wade shoved the prisoners with a swear word, forcing them to move on. I stayed with the lieutenant. We had walked about 150 meters, and there was still a long way to go to where the helicopter had landed. Its blades were spinning slowly, with an even whirring sound. I knew my pilot was in a hurry to take off, and that made me nervous. The helicopter was a convenient target on a flat, open field. I wanted to pick up the fallen man and get him going. Seeing Wade hijacking the others, I told the lieutenant to catch up with them. "Don't worry, flyboy. The helicopter won't leave without you." He looked at the shivering prisoner curled up in a ball. "Kick his ass, Hawley. If this scumbag doesn't get up in 2 seconds, shoot him." Hawley kicked the man in the back with his boot at the base of his spine. The man screamed in pain but didn't get up. Only the hands covering his head shook, as if he had lost control of them. Hawley continued to kick him. The man flinched and shrank even more with each kick. "You're going to break his back," I shouted. "Mas, shoot him." ordered the lieutenant. No, sir. As tied to the patient. Hawley chambered around, brought the rifle a few inches closer to the man's head, and fired. The bullet pierced the man's arm and blew his head off. Hawley's boots were splattered with a bloody mass. He wiped it on the dead man's pajamas. You keep quiet about that, flyboy, said the lieutenant. Let's go. The lieutenant and Hawley followed the others. I walked. In the back, after a few paces, I turned around and looked toward the village. I wondered if the colonel and his men had paid attention to the shot. Nothing was visible except the tall grass surrounding the village. I realized that it was foolish to think that a single rifle shot would attract anyone's attention in this country of incessant gunfire. When we caught up with the others, the lieutenant said, It's all right, Wade. Jink resisted, and we shot him. Good, said Wade. What do we do with this herd? I can't stand these screaming brats anymore. No, take them to the helicopter. The children cried uncontrollably. The man and the two women looked at us with eyes full of fear. They realized what had happened, and when Wade and Harley shouted at them to go, they sped up, trying to get to the rescue helicopter. The helicopter was less than 100 meters away when gunfire erupted from the south, from the edge of the forest. We rushed to the ground, leaving our captives, who stood in confusion, huddled together and trying to cover each other. Bullets whistled in the still air. I shouted for them to lie down, but they continued to stand. The women shrilled and clutched their children tighter, and the children yelled even louder. Behind me, the lieutenant and the two soldiers were blindly firing at the edge of the forest, even though it was beyond the actual fire of their guns. This picture. Screaming women with screaming kids standing alone in the middle of the fire infuriated me because I was powerless to do anything about it. Finally, the lieutenant and the soldiers stopped firing, and I heard the roar of the helicopter's propellers running at full power. My first impulse was to get out of the ditch and run to the helicopter. I didn't want to stay here. It was my helicopter. I belonged to its crew. But the prisoners kept me from running. I couldn't leave them and had a duty to get them to safety. I was responsible for them. I thought of the poor man lying dead with his head crushed in the ditch. He was no longer a detainee. He was now considered a slain enemy. I shouted to the women, signaling them to lie down. This time they obeyed and squatted down close together. Just then the first mines fell to our right, ripping deafeningly into the soft soil and spewing out clumps of earth with green shoots of rice. Now what do we do? Arlie asked the lieutenant. Now I say we get out of here before they get a shot at us, said Wade. Yes, agreed the lieutenant. We don't have any firepower. We put a new magazine in his rifle. We're going back, flyboy. Better hurry to the chopper. You can't stay here under the mines for long? What about the prisoners? I asked. We'll take care of them. Yes, I have to get them out. That's what the colonel ordered. No, don't worry about the colonel. I'll take care of it. I didn't know what to do. I knew Sergeant Bright couldn't wait long with the mines going off. He had to get up. With every second he was at risk of being shot at. We can still get them to the chopper. The mines can't reach us, I said. The gooks on the edge of the woods are going to love that, Wade quipped. They're just waiting for us to run so they can kill us all. I don't intend to go anywhere near that helicopter, Lieutenant. Why should we risk our lives for a bunch of stinking gooks? I don't see the point, Lieutenant. The lieutenant looked at me. We're not going any further, flyboy. Go. That's an order. I'll take them with me, I said. You're not taking anybody. If you don't leave now, I guarantee you'll never get to your chopper. Understand? I looked at the cruel faces of the lieutenant. Wade and Hawley stood up and ran, head down, past the captives. I was ashamed to look them in the eye. I had run 10 to 15 meters, treading heavily on the embankment between the ditches, heading straight for the helicopter when automatic rifle shots rang out behind me. I didn't turn around. The screams told me everything. My chest burned like hot coal, and I was short of breath, but I managed to stay on my feet and kept running. There was a second burst of gunfire, and the screaming stopped. In my ears again sounded only the bursting of mines and the whirring of propellers. 50 meters away from the helicopter, I felt safe. They weren't going to shoot me. The crew could see me now, and I knew the helicopter would wait. I kept running until I was under the propellers. A jet of air knocked me to the ground. Through the noise of the propellers, I heard voices calling my name. I struggled to my feet and grasped the frame of the door. Jonesy, the other on-board gunner, dragged me aboard. I gasped and fell to the floor as the helicopter lifted off and flew low to the ground. "How are you doing, okay?" shouted Jonesy. I nodded and sat up, sucking air in through my mouth. Jonesy left me and took his place at the machine gun. We were now travelling rapidly overhead, keeping away from the edge of the forest, and began to climb sharply, gaining altitude quickly, so that in case of a dangerous hit, the pilot would have enough altitude and time to make a forced landing. After a few more seconds, we reached 1,000 feet and began levelling off, flying over the village north of the rice paddy, well out of mortar range. I removed my rifle, set it aside, and took my place at the airborne machine gun. Adjusting the headphone, I heard Sergeant Bright's voice over the intercom. "You there, Glass?" "I'm here." "What happened out there?" "We were walking with the prisoners when the Charlies opened fire." "Where are the prisoners?" "This. I had to leave them behind. Lieutenant told me to leave without them." "We've been waiting for you, Glass." "Another minute and I would have had to leave you there." "I understand. I was in a hurry, too, when I heard the sound of the propellers." "What are they going to do with the prisoners?" The lieutenant didn't say. After a moment's hesitation, I asked, "Didn't you see us coming up?" "We saw nothing but fire from that edge of the woods." "How many of you were there?" "The lieutenant, 2 soldiers, and the prisoners." "Nursey, poor things. I hope they got out of there." "They must have." We flew in a wide circle over the village, which brought us to the northern edge of the rice field. It spread out in an almost exact square. As we made a second circle, I noticed a group of soldiers in the northwest corner near the edge of the village. To the southwest of it, near where I had left the lieutenant and the soldiers, mines were bursting in short, small bursts of fire. I looked around the rice field with my eyes, but saw no movement. As we came back over the village in a left arc, Sergeant Bright's voice was heard. "Oh, Glass, I think your buddies are pinned to the ground by mortar fire. We can get home without our cargo, but we can make a neat low approach to the edge of the woods and treat the Charlies to a few rockets. The guys down there will thank you. What do you say?" "I agree, Sergeant," I said, "but keep right above the trees, west to east, so they can't see us coming up." "All right. I'll make a wide turn and come in at treetop level. You and Jonesy point your machine guns straight down and give them heat. We'll fire all the ammo we can at them. You got that, Jonesy?" "Got it, Sarge." "All right. Let's go." We made a wide circle north of the village and then began a rapid descent. We were cruising at 300 feet and continued to descend as we passed over the troops in the northeast corner of the field. They were looking up and waving their rifles shining in the sun. From my seat by the left door, the entire square of the field was visible. I looked around it with my eyes and found the spot where we were landing. Not far from it, to the east of it, I saw them 3 military men. Cut off from their own by mortar fire from the south and west, they were walking north to take cover in a field of elephant grass. Suddenly they lay low, and I lost sight of them, but I memorized the spot. We were walking along the west side of the rice field, and the sun to the right was casting a helicopter shadow on the edge of the field. We descended to 100 feet and continued to descend as we approached the western edge of the forest edge. The helicopter shuddered as Sergeant Bright slowed down to turn steeply over the trees, then lunged forward again at full power. We leveled off 10 feet above the treetops. The Viet Cong were positioned 800 feet directly ahead. A few seconds after completing the turn, the co-pilot fired the first 2 rockets, then 2 more and 2 more. The helicopter, swaying, sliced through the air. The carpet of leaves swept beneath us. I set the machine gun automatic, pointed the barrel straight down, and took the trigger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds. I pressed the trigger with my right hand and fed the tape with my left. On the other side, Jonesy opened fire. The helicopter, crackling and shaking, leapt forward. I watched the tape, and when it reached halfway down, I released the release. You see, I had my own plans for using the rest of it. Jonesy kept firing until the ribbon ran out. By then we had passed the edge of the woods and started to turn north. I leveled the machine gun and took up the trigger again. "Goddamn, we gave them a hell of a beating," Sergeant Bright exclaimed. "Let's see how the boys liked it." He steered the helicopter straight toward the eastern edge of the rice paddy and descended lower. "Good," I thought to myself. "I'll keep like this until we get to the end of the field. and then I'll cross it towards the soldiers near the village. Let me know what you see below." "You can't see the field from my side," Jonesy reported. "Great," I thought. "I can see the whole field, Sergeant," I said. The mortars had stopped firing. That's a hell of a thing." I turned off the intercom and focused all my attention on the rice paddy. To the right ahead, I could see the hill we were landing on. The helicopter was rapidly approaching it when I saw the 3 military men again. They were walking toward the tall grass in the northeast corner of the field. I turned my machine gun around and caught them in the scope. I followed them, turning the barrel as the helicopter made a wide turn just above the field of elephant grass. The lieutenant and 2 corporals were approaching the edge of the field. They were no more than 200 meters from my machine gun. When we came out of the turn in front of them, they didn't even look up. Keeping them in my sights, I opened fire and fired 10 to 12 shots before I released the trigger. All 3 fell face forward and disappeared into the elephant grass. Although a cool wind was blowing in my face, I was drenched in sweat. The deed was done, but I had no time to think about it. "Where did you shoot, Glass?" I hesitated, then answered quickly. "I spotted some Viet Cong in the field, Sarge. Maybe it was those prisoners. They might have gotten away during the shelling. Maybe." "Did you hit them?" "Yeah, but I'm 14. Hey, look down there." Sergeant Bright exclaimed excitedly. "They're hailing us." We were flying over the outskirts of the village. Down on the left, a group of soldiers waved at us with rifles and helmets. There was no more firing from the edge of the forest. Honestly, we gave them a great cheer. In response to the cheers, Sergeant Bright descended 100 feet and made a farewell approach, rocking the helicopter from side to side until we passed the soldiers. We were now flying low over a flat, lush green delta valley crisscrossed by brown ribbons of water feeding the rice paddies. A village of thatch-roofed huts showed up ahead, and the sergeant transitioned into a long, steady climb to 2,000 feet, then levelled the helicopter and turned north toward home. We flew in silence for a few minutes. Then Sergeant Bright turned on the intercom. "Glass." "Go ahead, Sergeant." "I just had a funny thought." "What is it?" "We came to take prisoners and ended up maybe shooting them." "Yeah." "No. Strange things happen, don't they?" "Very strange." "They've had it pretty bad." Jonesy spoke excitedly. "The rockets came down right on the Charlie's head. They heard us coming, but they couldn't see us. They must have pissed themselves. This is the kind of war I like, Sergeant. We hit and they don't hit back." They talked non-stop all the way back to the base, but I kept quiet, and they did without me. It was just the usual chatter after a mission, and I didn't care for it. On the approach to the base, we passed 2 transport helicopters, ready for departure. They were packed to the brim with soldiers. Apparently, they were the reinforcements the colonel had requested. They were to comb the area. On the way to the command post, Sergeant Bright asked me how many enemy soldiers I had destroyed in the rice paddy. I said it was 4. I didn't mention the children. "Is that all?" "Yeah, why?" "The casualty count, buddy. That's the first thing you ask. How many killed?" Oh, I didn't think of that." "You're in a bad mood, Glass, and you don't look so good." "No, it's nothing. I'm just tired. Didn't sleep well last night." "You should go to bed. We got nothing to do till tomorrow. I'll report back without you." "No, thank you." I parted with them at the command post and went to my tent. Dinner time was approaching, but I decided to skip it. I had no appetite. Last week, as I sat on my prison bunk writing down what you have just read, I found it difficult to go on. I tried in vain to recapture the feelings I experienced that evening at Camp Jordan after parting with the helicopter crew members at the command post. Although that day was one of the most significant of my year in Vietnam, so much has happened to me since then that I find it extremely difficult to remember that night. But, of course, it's not just that. It is still painful for me to recall those events and revisit what I did and why I did it. However, there is no avoiding it, and the need to tell you what happened to me is overwhelming. I want you to understand me. So last week I decided to do an experiment. If I tried lying on my bunk, closing my eyes and concentrating, maybe I could forget this cell existed and turn my thoughts from my upcoming trial to that night at Camp Jordan. If I could express thoughts as they arose, it was worth a try. The next morning I asked my anxious attorneys to get me a tape recorder. I said I wanted to record answers to some of their questions that I couldn't give in person. They rejoiced, eager to get any information that might help my case or at least enlighten them. They got permission from their superiors and brought me a tape recorder 2 days ago. After that, I managed to record my hidden thoughts, and yesterday I transcribed them into a diary and erased the tape. At this point, I had no intention of giving the material to the lawyers. As I said, I didn't believe it would help me. That is for you to judge. The thoughts on the tape were pretty jumbled, and I've edited them just for clarity. Here's the gist of them. When I think back to that night, the images in front of me are not of the 3 American servicemen I killed during the day, but of Vietnamese prisoners huddled together in a rice paddy. I see a man lying on the ground, covering his head with trembling hands, eyes full of terror, and the rifle hovering over his head shattered by a bullet. And those desperate women clutching their screaming children to them. Women who are beaten, kicked, humiliated and ridiculed. I am deeply disgusted. I am now tormented by the guilt of having run to the helicopter, abandoning the prisoners, even though I knew that the lieutenant and the soldiers were going to shoot them. I am haunted by the thought that I could have done something to stop the killers, but I didn't even try. I was too afraid for my life to try to save them. When we took off, I don't think I had any intention of killing the lieutenant and the soldiers. But I did look for them in the field, and when I found them, it was like something hit me in the head. I wanted to kill them. I wanted to make up for the deaths of those Vietnamese. I just had to do it. I don't know how to explain that I so easily shot those men in the field, but that's what happened. I knew that if they weren't stopped, they would continue to kill, and it would be my fault for giving them the opportunity. I remember lying in my bunk that night and being thrown into a fever by what I had done, but it didn't last long. I was soon gripped by anxiety for myself. I wondered what would happen if 3 dead Americans were found in the elephant grass, pierced by American bullets. Would there be an investigation? Would my pilot tell that I had fired a machine gun in a field where he saw no one? All night long, I imagined a court-martial where I would be required to explain why I had shot my soldiers. To say it was an accident, that I mistook them for Viet Cong, which I told the pilot, or tell the whole truth about what happened in the rice paddy, and not tell the story of how Sergeant Stone slit the throat of an innocent boy, how Corporal Dole cut the finger off a dead sniper, how Hammer killed a wounded boy and tried to kill me. Will the judges be able to understand? Will they dare to speak out against our heinous atrocities? I stayed up all night, but my fears were not realized. There was no investigation into the deaths of the 3 soldiers. Nor was there any report of the killing of the Vietnamese detainees. The next morning there was only a report of the Viet Cong defeating the Viet Cong and capturing their position at the edge of the forest. We counted the dead on both sides, and the ratio of losses was in our favor, and that was all that mattered. The war continued, and so did my participation in it. One morning, a week after that sortie, there was talk throughout the camp about an incident that had occurred the day before. It had to do with a colonel I had met in a rice paddy. Colonel Robert and his soldiers were patrolling near one village when they were fired upon by a single sniper. No one was hurt, and since the village was considered pacified, the colonel ordered them not to fire on it. A methodical search for the sniper was made, and when a man ran out of the hut, the soldiers shot him and set the hut on fire. The colonel arrived on the spot just as a woman ran out of the burning hut, and 2 soldiers immediately killed her. The colonel was furious, and on his return to camp, put the soldiers under arrest and reported the incident to the brigade commander. The brigade commander, Colonel Wolfe, paid no attention to the incident, remarking to Colonel Robert that it was customary for soldiers to destroy huts and kill their occupants for harbouring the enemy. Colonel Robert was outraged at his superior's refusal to back him up and demanded that the soldiers be punished for their flagrant violation of orders. Colonel Wolfe disagreed and advised him to forget about the affair. To stir it up, he said, was bad for troop morale. The general mood in the camp was on Colonel Wolfe's side. So what if they killed a Gukova Baba and burned down a hut? It's a common thing in a combat situation. Colonel Robert knew that very well. If that lousy sniper had jumped out of the hut firing, he could have killed our soldiers. What would Colonel Robert say to that? Don't shoot. Give a shit about it. These damn pacified villages are the worst. You never know who the enemy is or where they are. We should burn the hell out of every Guk village in the country. That'll force the Charlies out into the open. Anyway, we know full well that the Guks would kill our women and children if given the chance. and they wouldn't have that kind-hearted Colonel Robert. And you know why? Because gooks aren't human. They're nothing but animals. The only difference is they can shoot, so we have to kill them before they kill us. That's what it's all about, killing. We have to do a casualty count their entire population and kill them until they're all wiped out. Colonel Wolfe understands that, and you can bet your head that when he sends the casualty report to division headquarters, the Gookova Broad will be included. The soldiers just did their job. And the goddamn Colonel Robert is out of his mind. Hold your fire. Until when? Until we see the whites of their slanted eyes? I wouldn't want to go on patrol with him. If I was a brigade commander, I'd put him in charge of counting enemy casualties. Then he'd be busy all the time. Amen. The next day we heard that Colonel Wolfe had verbally reprimanded those 2 soldiers and returned them to their company for further duty. They were warmly welcomed back. Colonel Robert persisted in punishing the soldiers and reported the incident directly to the division commander. As a result, he was immediately transferred to another unit in the north. This outcome reinforced my opinion that it was futile to go against the system. If the colonel couldn't get his charges resolved, what to say about some airborne gunner? Moreover, it became clear to me that the military command considered killing gooks as a normal procedure, not as a violation of norms. However, the case was not that simple. The command was sympathetic to the perpetual fear and tension that beset the position of the line soldier. He was operating in a foreign country, despised by its people. He did not regard the Vietnamese as human beings, and his instinct for self-preservation often drove him to the most brutal acts. His safety depended on his comrades on the battlefield and his own weapons. Everything else was a constant threat to him, and his overwhelming fear for his life found an outlet in pulling the trigger. The army understood this and recognized the grave danger to its cause. Therefore, in order to fulfill its objectives, one had to look past excesses. However, like Colonel Robert, I did not fit this pattern. I did not possess the capacity for murder and could not justify it. On the contrary, I felt morally obliged to stop it. Therefore, the division commander's decision on Colonel Robert's protest had a profound effect on me. I became a calculating enemy of the system. I had no qualms of conscience and acted in cold blood when the question of murder came up. You may have read about the operation in the village of Bongby in which I participated. It was briefly reported in some newspapers when I was already in prison. It was 8 months ago. By that time I had served more than half of my 365 days in Vietnam. It took a long time for this incident to surface. According to some, the military commanders managed to create a conspiracy of silence around it. According to others, someone in the highest levels of the country felt that Americans would not tolerate another tragedy, shortly after the horrible, disgusting massacre at My Lai. Be that as it may, the events at Bongby had far less impact on the conscience of Americans than the My Lai massacre. The My Lai massacre seemed monstrous even to many of us who fought in Vietnam. Yet the Americans were not as shocked, though greatly disturbed, to learn of what happened at Bongby simply because it happened after My Lai. And while Americans were desperate to think of the atrocity at My Lai as a horrible exception, the events at Bongby made it clear that it was not. Perhaps that is why the crime at Bongby was hushed up for so long and attracted so little attention afterward. Almost everyone wanted to believe it didn't happen. But it did. I saw it. I participated in it. For me, the events of that day began at 8 o'clock in the morning at the command post at Camp Jordan. My crew had been called for a special assignment in the lower delta. The briefing officer circled Bongby on the map and informed us that Company D of the 4th Infantry Brigade was en route there. It has orders, moving south, to clear the area of the enemy. This part of the delta had long been controlled by the Viet Cong, and a broad offensive was forthcoming to drive the enemy out of there. Bongby was the assembly point to launch the offensive. It was chosen because it was on top of an enemy stronghold and had recently been evacuated by the Viet Cong after they had forcibly mobilized all able-bodied men and stripped the village clean of all rice supplies. We were tasked to follow behind the transport helicopters to Bongby and be in readiness to provide fire support to D Company when requested. 4 other attack helicopters were ordered to patrol on the flanks of the enemy position and support the other 2 companies. An attack of this magnitude could only mean that the Viet Cong troops were numerous and well fortified, although the officer who briefed us was careful not to say so. It has become the rule not to give estimates of total enemy strength at briefings. During the last few months, there have been several instances of troops refusing to attack heavily fortified positions, and the commanders have been overindulgent in this respect. But the new order could not deceive anyone. We all knew that the number of our troops was determined by the number of enemy troops and that he had a significant superiority on his side. The transport helicopters took off 20 minutes ahead of us, but because our speed was greater, we arrived at Bongby less than 10 minutes after them. As we hovered over the landing zone, a grassy plain about 200 meters from the village, the empty transport helicopters roared to life, and the soldiers of D Company had already formed into 3 platoons and were moving across the field toward a group of thatched huts, glistening in the bright morning sun. There were no inhabitants visible in either the hamlet or the field, but the soldiers approached cautiously. As we hovered waiting for the transport helicopters to take off, I noticed something on the ground that clearly indicated the Viet Cong had been here. 30 meters from the huts, across the narrow dirt road leading into the village, 2 dead buffalo lay side by side. Next to them I recognized the corpse of a man or a boy. My first thought was that the Viet Cong had killed the animals at this spot to block the road. They usually punished unfriendly villages by taking away crops and destroying livestock. In this case, dead buffalo and a dead man completed the picture of a Viet Cong terrorized village that the officer instructing us had painted. But where were the rest of the inhabitants? There was no destruction visible in the village itself. Were they not hiding from us in huts? There was hardly a village in all of Vietnam that had not experienced the fear of death from the Viet Cong or from us, and the sudden appearance on its doorstep of helicopters landing troops in combat gear would have greatly alarmed any peasant. They were victims caught in the crossfire of an endless guerrilla war, and from what I could see, they couldn't even bury their dead in peace. Constant fear for their lives was the prevailing feeling with which everyone lived. The Viet Cong experienced it in the jungle and in their caves, the peasants in their huts and in the fields. We experienced it in helicopters and on patrol. Action to detect and destroy the enemy was an apt title. That was the nature of our work, and that was what the farmers feared. So that day in Bongby, as I learned later, the peasants hid in their huts, hoping that we would quietly pass by and let them get on with their lives. But it wasn't to be. As soon as the transport helicopters lifted off and headed for the base, Sergeant Bright swooped down into the landing zone. At that moment, through the roar of the engines, we heard rifle fire. On the right, soldiers moving crouched on both sides of the road, leading to the village, were firing indiscriminately, kicking up clouds of dust around dead buffalo and man. They fired more than 30 shots before they ceased firing. It seemed foolish to waste bullets on a dead man and dead animals, but I didn't try to understand the soldiers' belligerent impulses. I was only relieved that it was not the enemy who was firing, but then we began to have our own worries. We were descending slowly, hovering 15 feet above the ground, when suddenly the propellers stopped and the helicopter plummeted to the ground. The impact crumpled the landing gear. Both crutches snapped like dry branches, and the helicopter tilted and landed on its belly. We were all shaken up, but no one was hurt. I turned on the intercom. It was silent. It took us a few seconds to realize the entire power system was down. Sergeant Bright couldn't explain what was wrong. Jonesy and I got out on the ground to survey the damage. The landing gear had flattened against the fuselage like a steel pancake. Sergeant Bright and co-pilot Sergeant Leader checked the controls. They were out of order, but it didn't matter much now. We couldn't get up again anyway because you can't land safely without crutches. Helicopters are designed so that you can't land on your belly more than once. Our primary concern was communications. With the radio silent, we could not contact the base or the troops. Sergeant Bright ordered me and Jonesy to report our situation to the D Company commander. We had to call in another attack helicopter for fire support for D Company, and we needed a Chinook helicopter with a crane to get us out of here. I didn't really like being an infantryman again, but there was no other option. Jonesy and I grabbed our rifles and ammo pouches and followed the soldiers advancing on the village. There was a dirt road close by, and we headed straight toward it across an open field. I wanted to catch up with the soldiers before they reached the village and broke into small groups. On the road we switched to a sprint until we reached the dead buffaloes blocking our way. They were covered with many bloody wounds where bullets had torn the hide. The dead man turned out to be a boy with a shattered head and a body riddled with bullets. Apparently the soldiers had been practicing shooting at him. It was a horrible sight, and I hurried past him and moved along the road beside him, with Jonesy. Ahead, on the outskirts of the village, the soldiers, divided into pairs, We're approaching the first row of huts, bordering the open field. 10 soldier was left on the road, 25 meters from the hamlet. He turned around fearfully, pointing his rifle at us. When we, out of breath, approached him, he lowered the barrel. "Where did you guys come from?" Jonesy explained who we were and told us what had happened to our helicopter. "It's a crappy case," the soldier said. "The lieutenant's going to be pissed as hell if we run into a Charlie and don't get fire support." "Of course he will. That's why we need to find him now," Jonesy said. "Where is he?" The soldier pointed to the left. "Over there, at the edge of the forest, with a squad to intercept the Charlie if he runs that way when we enter the village." "Is there expected to be a fight here?" I asked. "We have heard that the Charlie has left this village and taken all the men with him." "Yes, that's what they think. But have you seen the dead buffalo and guck there? It's a Viet Cong village and we've been ordered to burn it down." "Ordered by who?" "The lieutenant." "What if there are still women and children here?" "Anybody we find, we need to hold for questioning." "Listen, Glass," Jonesy intervened, "let's go to the lieutenant." "Is the radio man with him?" he asked the soldier. "Yes, and the other one's in the village. It's a big offensive. We have 2 more platoons on the flanks." "Are you going to the village?" I asked the soldier. He shook his head. "My orders are to stay here on the road and hold off any civilians coming out of the village." "Maybe we should split up," I suggested to Jonesy. "I'll stay here and look for the radio operator in the village, and you report to the lieutenant. The sooner we get in touch, the sooner we can get out of here. I'll meet you at the chopper in 15 minutes. "Okay." Jonesy turned and walked across the field toward the edge of the forest, which was about 800 meters away. I followed him with my eyes until he disappeared into the tall grass. Suddenly shots rang out behind me. Without turning around, I rushed to the ground. The soldier was lying on his stomach on the road, pointing his rifle at the village, in the direction where the firing was taking place. The firing stopped, then resumed. The shots pounded like a drumbeat, but we couldn't see what was happening. In the hot morning sun, the village still looked peaceful. What the platoon met there was hidden from us. The rifle fire kept us alert and in suspense. To the left and then to the right, rifle shots crackled too. There seemed to be a battle going on throughout the village, though nothing could be seen. The soldier turned around and looked at me. "It looks like they found Charlie," he shouted. I made no reply and he turned toward the village again. We lay in wait and watched. The firing increased. 40 meters to the left in front, 3 figures appeared from behind a hut and rushed into the field. They had run about 15 meters away. When a soldier sprang out of the village and ran after them, at the edge of the field he stopped abruptly, dropped to his knee, and quickly opened fire. All 3, flying through the air, slumped in the grass. The soldier jumped up, ran to the spot and combed it with fire. I saw him look down, take off his helmet and calmly wipe his forehead with his sleeve. Then he put his helmet back on and slowly walked back into the village. Soon he disappeared behind a hut. A few seconds later, puffs of smoke billowed out and the thatched roof burst into flames. All the while, methodical rifle fire was coming from all parts of the village. There was something frightening and ominous about the atmosphere. There was a violence hanging in the air different from when one meets the enemy in open combat. There was no enemy to be seen, no peasants to be seen, except for 3 children struck down by a soldier. What the hell was all this shooting for? If there is an enemy in the village, how could that soldier so carelessly, without showing any signs of caution, go back there? He still stands before my eyes, all these months later, calmly towering in the morning sun over 3 dead children and pouring fire on them. I see them bouncing in the grass as the bullets tear through their bodies. I see everything else that happened that morning as if it was just yesterday. I see the woman who suddenly appeared on the road from the village, heading straight for us, half crouched and clutching a baby to her chest. She shook her head from side to side, desperately seeking refuge in this sun-drenched plain, then stopped motionless on the road, noticing a soldier prostrate in the dust with a rifle pointed at her. Her head snapped back in horror just before the soldier opened fire from 20 meters away. The bullets separated the woman's arms, the child fell to the ground and she collapsed on top of him, still trying to shield him from harm. I see her raise her head from the road dust, staring at us with her eyes. Bullets kicked up dust in front of her. Finally, they hit her head and crushed the top of her skull. I see the soldier turn toward me with a satisfied smile, reloading his rifle and turning again in anticipation. I see a big, lumbering black soldier walking out of the village, waddling awkwardly on his healthy leg and dragging the other. With each step, his whole body lurching sideways. In spite of his wounded leg, he was walking along the road in a terrible excitement, and several times it seemed that the soldier was about to fall headfirst onto the road. But he kept his balance and rushed forward. I see him coming toward the dead woman who had fallen upon the child. I hear him cry out, God, then stumbles around her and walks right into the rifle of the soldier, pointing at him, who turns around and looks at me confused. Oh, it's the tall man. What the hell is this doing? I couldn't talk to him. I didn't take my eyes off the black soldier coming at us, panting and sucking in air with his mouth, his face glistening with sweat. At last he staggered toward the soldier, sank to the ground, and stretched out his wounded leg. His broad, flat face was contorted with pain. I crawled toward them. The black soldier was muttering something and shaking his head. Blood mixed with mud was oozing from the wound on his foot. I can see his broad chest heaving and hear him sobbing, trying to catch his breath, and muttering, "They're crazy guys." And tears stream from his black eyes, mixing with the sweat on his face and bubbling on his lips. The soldier grabs him by the shoulders and asks in a frightened, pleading voice, "What's the matter? What's the matter, Versila?" And Versila shakes his head and mutters, "They're crazy, completely crazy." "Who's crazy? Charlie? Did he hurt you?" And the tall man cries and shakes his head, then clamps his hands over his ears, as if trying to muffle some sound in his head. And the soldier shakes him, trying to bring him out of his shock, and demands to know how he was wounded. "Did you step on a landmine, big man?" And Versila, closing his eyes and squeezing out tears, shaking his head and gulping air, slowly calms down. But when he opens his eyes, he recognizes the soldier and screams. "Bastards! Murderers! Hey, he's crazy from the pain, the soldier told me. We should send him to the medics. He's not himself." I see the face of the tall man grow stern. There are no more tears or screams, only black eyes still full of anger. I hear a voice holding back the anger and spitting out words like a river flowing slow and steady until it reaches the tide and bursts out of its banks. "I'm fine, buddy. I'm all right. I'm not out of my mind with pain. My leg doesn't bother me. It'll heal. I did it myself. Self-mutilation. I shot my leg so I wouldn't shoot my head. You understand? It was the only way I could get out of there without going crazy." He ran his eyes over our faces. No mines, no Charlies, nothing, just women and children and toothless old men. "That's all there is in this village. They are beaten, killed, burned and raped by your white bastards from your Liberation Army of the United States. This goddamn war is not mine. I don't shoot babies. No, sir. I'd rather be killed, but I'm not doing it. You understand, buddy? We were afraid of Charlies when we came into this village, but there ain't no Charlies. Not anywhere. We found nothing but huts." "Burn them," says the sergeant. "Shoot them when they run out." And they did what he said. They went crazy. I can see puffs of smoke rising over the village behind Versila, and he's sitting in the road, talking and not even turning his head. I see the whole village engulfed in flames like one giant bonfire. Women, children, and a few old men stumbling across the field, falling, getting up, and running again. Soldiers chasing them, pouring fire into the field, cutting down every last one of them. I can see Versila talking about the nightmare he went through and never turning his head to the nightmare going on behind him. A naked kid crawls out of a burning hut, crying and screaming, and the sergeant comes up to me and says, "What the hell are you looking at, wussy?" "Shoot that brat. This is a Viet Cong village." And I say, "I don't kill naked guys, Sarge. I don't have a rifle." "Bullshit," says the sergeant, fires a line at the kid, and calmly walks away. And when a girl about 10 years old pops out of a nearby hut, followed by her mother, the soldier kills the mother, rips off the girl's pajamas and starts pinching her tiny breasts and pinning her down. The scumbag threw his rifle on the ground and the girl broke free of him and ran to him. But he managed to pick up the rifle and crushed her head, and then he ran into a neighbouring hut and started shooting. Everyone was doing the same thing, killing, raping and killing again. That's when I put a bullet in my leg and got the hell out of there. It's worse than hell, man, and I ain't going back. You know what I'm saying? You lousy bastard, why'd you kill that woman and child out here on the road? Eh? Why'd you do that? Oh, you're crazy too. There ain't no Viet Cong here. And I see fury flash in his eyes, and his mighty hands grab the soldier sitting next to him on the ground. A huge fist hits him on the nose and the soldier topples over on his back, struggles to get to his feet, and screams, "You nigger scum!" And he points the rifle trembling in his hands at Vasila, and the tall man screams, "You white motherfucker! What are you doing?" I see the soldier's face contorted with hatred and the blood running from his nose, and I hear him growl, "Nigger gook," and puts a cartridge in the chamber. "I'll split your other leg. Why did you hit me?" The rifle pointed at him riles up the tall man. "Why did you kill that woman? Damn you! Was she coming at you with a rifle? Did she threaten you?" I saw a soldier shooting at the gooks in the field, and I thought they were Viet Cong, and then this woman came running out at us, and I fired. I'm required to kill gooks. That's why I'm here. You're required to detain civilians for interrogation. That's what we've been told. Jesus, everybody's shooting. I've never seen anyone detain anyone for questioning. Didn't you tell me that yourself? They're going crazy out there. Don't you understand? They're killing everyone in that village, and there's no Charlie. Come on, I'm not in charge of the platoon. We were ordered to clear the village and burn it down. No one ordered us to kill women and children. Since when did you become such a sight? You've killed more than anyone else in the platoon. Viet Cong, buddy. The enemy is Charlies, not children and women. I see the soldier shake his head incredulously, look at the village spewing smoke and flames, hear the gunfire and wonder what kind of madhouse he's in. And what's the point of arguing with a crazy Negro who shot himself in the leg and smashed his nose for no reason? He wiped the blood from his nose, looked at the red smears on his fingers, and at the sight of them, his anger flared up again. "Take that crazy son of a bitch away, or I'll kill him," shouted the soldier to me. "Take him to the lieutenant. When he hears that fool shot himself in the leg, he'll show him where the crawfish are." I can see Topsy's face break into a wide grin at Uncle Tom, revealing a mouthful of teeth and wide gums. "That's right, boy, take me to the lieutenant. I want to tell him everything. I'm looking forward to that damn court-martial. Looking forward to it, buddy?" He kept smirking at the bloody soldier. "Yeah, kid, I killed the most in that bastard company and got the most decorations, and I'll tell the court how I got them and how I shot you in the leg, and how you killed a broad running down the road with a baby in her arms, you son of a bitch." I see Vasila's eyes flash, and he throws back his head and bursts into loud, wild laughter, and he lies down on the dusty road, shouting and raging at the soldier standing over him with his rifle cocked. "No. Shut up, or I'll smash your goddamn head in." The big guy just laughs and closes his eyes. "Shoot, asshole, shoot. I'm waiting." And the soldier points the rifle at the tall man's head and holds it there. And I sit on the road, point the rifle at the soldier, and hear my voice. "I'll give it to you now." I see Vasila raise his head, look at the soldier with hard, cold eyes, and throw venomous taunts in his face. Kid's a lady killer. Baby is a baby killer. I think at that moment he wanted to be shot. I see the trembling rifle of the soldier at the Vasila's head and hear him scream, "You crazy, lousy nigger gook." And I realize that he intended to kill Vasila. I don't remember how I pulled the trigger or whether I heard the shot, but I see the soldier's chest unfurled at such close range and his body falling forward. I see Vasila rolling over in the dust as the soldier stretched face down beside him. I was haunted by nightmares, and always the same. The soldier yells, "You crazy, lousy nigger gook," but not at Topsy, but at me. Then no sound is heard, only the soldier's chest opening up like red poppy petals in slow motion on the screen, revealing a black core, and it grows ever larger, looming over me and obscuring everything around me and choking me until I wake up in a cold sweat. It's a strange nightmare, because it never involves Topsy. Nightmares like this went on for a long time and then suddenly stopped, until last night in my cell, when I fell asleep thinking about the incident. Maybe now that I've described them in these pages, the nightmares will stop forever. After killing the soldier, I was so shaken up that I didn't hear what the tall man was saying to me. I only remember him mumbling something to himself and smiling at me in surprise. I didn't understand why he was smiling, and I thought maybe he was really crazy, but he wasn't crazy. He hadn't lost his mind. When he saw me looking panic-stricken at him and at the village, he realized what was on my mind. Nobody saw anything but me, buddy. They're too busy killing. Maybe we were seen from the edge of the forest, I asked. No. Can you see them at the edge of the forest? No. The grass is too tall. That's right, buddy. The grass is too tall for them too. Hey, buddy, why did you do that? He almost killed you. You should have stopped him. You stopped him good, buddy. But why? Because you've never seen me before. Because I hated him when he killed that woman and child. He enjoyed it. But why did you tease him like that? You were asking for it. The smile's gone from his face. Do you hear the shooting and the screaming? I think they drove me crazy. I wanted out. I've been in Vietnam for 9 months, but I've never seen anything like this until today. I can't take it anymore. I just want to get rid of this horror. Well, now with this leg, you're out of it. They'll send you home. No. They're going to put me black ass on trial. He sat down in the road and, shaking his head, spoke loudly, as if I were not here. I've got 32 Viet Cong on my personal record. You think that means anything to the brass? All they know is I shot myself in the leg. You put yourself out of commission, big man. You've gone off your combat post. Don't you understand? Yes, Sir Colonel. I did a bad thing. I should have stayed in the village and killed the women and children, sir. I did a bad thing, sir. Please, sir, don't punish me severely. The big man looked at me carefully, and his broad face broke into a smile again. Don't grieve, my friend. We'll be all right, both of us. We'll show that bastard army. As you envision it. Help me up. He held out his hand, and I lifted him to his feet. He towered over me, leaning on his healthy leg. He was probably 6 feet 6 inches tall, if not more. The big man turned around to look at the burning village. All the huts seemed to be burning. Puffs of smoke lined the horizon. There were no soldiers to be seen. Those who had run out into the field to shoot the fleeing peasants had returned to the village. The firing had fallen silent, with only the occasional short burst of gunfire. They went south, said Vasila. That's good. He looked at my epaulettes. Are you from this helicopter? Yeah. I thought so. How'd you end up here? I told him what happened to the chopper. I'm really glad, buddy. You saved my blackhead. Yeah, but I got myself in trouble. Listen, buddy. He pulled 2 grenades out of his belt. I'm going to put these things under the kid and pull the pin. He stepped on the mine, you know, and it tore the poor guy apart. All it did was tear off a piece of my foot. That's it, buddy. You think they're going to believe you? When I'm hobbling across the field, bleeding and screaming in pain, and they see my leg and I tell the commander what happened, he'll say, well, big man, you're as tough as a black cat. He don't give a damn about that brat since he'll have a witness to report, and I'm the only witness. Tomorrow my black ass will be resting on the clean sheets of a hospital room in Saigon. Now you run to your chopper, and I'll take care of baby. Hurry up. You're going to need help getting him up. I don't need help. Go, buddy. You did your job. This is my job. My leg doesn't bother me. I gave him my hand, and he shook it firmly. No, thank you, backstabber. All right. We're even. I'll see you after the revolution, white man, if you make it. And he laughed. I left him laughing and walked across the field to the helicopter. I'd gone about 15 meters when grenades exploded behind me. I turned around. The dead soldier lay in a shapeless heap a few feet from where I'd killed him. The big man waddled quickly, despite his sore leg, through the tall grass toward the edge of the forest. I never saw him again. He must have made a convincing report to the master, because I never heard anything about the case. Much later I remembered that I had not told him my last name. I remained only white to him, but he remembered my face, and if he saw it in the newspapers or on television after I became famous, I'd like to think he said, "Damn it, I know that white guy. He's a nice guy. Where are you now, backstabber?" As I said, the Bong Me massacre was not reported at the time, but 2 days after the action, Stars and Stripes posted a brief account of the Delta operation. I cut it out and still carry it with me. It reads, 3 infantry platoons of the American 4th Division carried out an important task in the Mekong Delta, south of Bong Me and, despite stubborn enemy resistance, cleared the area, which had long been a Viet Cong stronghold. Early in the advance on Bong Me, American troops encountered disorganized enemy fire, but it was quickly suppressed. Enemy troops fled south and took up a strong defensive position in a wooded area bordered by rice paddies. American casualties at Bong Me were minor. One soldier was blown up on a mine and another was wounded when D Company under Lieutenant Butcher stormed and relieved Bongby. During the gun battle, most of the village was destroyed and its civilian population rounded up for interrogation and subsequent relocation to safer areas. Combat helicopters conducted heavy strikes against fortified enemy positions on the edge of the forest for several hours before US forces attacked and destroyed the last pockets of resistance. At the time of this report, it is known that the enemy has lost 25 men killed, but this figure is expected to rise when the combing operation is over. 2 Americans were killed and 3 wounded in the battle, making the total American losses for the day's fighting 3 killed and 4 wounded. The 3 helicopters involved in the offensive returned safely to base. The report didn't say that my helicopter had crashed and was picked up and brought back to base. I guess that was of no interest to anyone but my crew. I don't know if the US press reprinted the Stars and Stripes report, but I do know that when the whole story of the Bongby massacre finally came to light, thanks to the persistent pursuits of a Midwestern reporter, the Army Command announced that there would be a thorough investigation of the events. Since then, although I have been perusing the newspapers in my cell, I have read nothing more about it. Apparently, the Army investigation was conducted in strict secrecy, and I suspect its findings will remain secret as well. Why wouldn't they be? Apparently no one cares. If Millage was a scandalous expose, who in this country needs another such don't you think? Remembering now how afraid I was of punishment for what I did that day, I realize how stupid it was. If you could burn a whole village to the ground and wipe out all its inhabitants without a shadow of a worry, then I had nothing to fear. The big man understood that. I can still see him laughing on the road by that blazing massacre.